Thank you, Philip. And I think it's part of this piece one. So I've done this study and I'll see if anyone who can any of this scheme, whatever it is. The case was established in 1950 by the guys. She started pensions, but she company just grew and grew and grew. The large fan manufacturer in South Africa. At the beginning of this year, we were actually sold from the family, Jennifer management buyout, and a tie-up with a brand merchant bank and a PE company. We manufacture furniture coatings, industrial coatings, automotive refinish products, and decorative coatings, which is actually our brand name is Deco for the decorative coatings, and an array of adhesives. We distribute spraying and sanding equipment. As our retail division is the House of Paints, and obviously we also retail through Timber City and various other distributors. Now, I don't need to preach to anybody here because obviously you understand when I say the most important part about finishing any object is the preparation you got into it. And preparation, anything can start off with your freestanding of your raw timber, your raw article, and then obviously the step-by-step steps that we take after that and ongoing. So in this presentation now, I'm going to touch on freestanding, the application of stains if you are going to stain with timber, the application and choice of sealer coat, what we call denugging or intermediate sanding, the application of your intermediate stain, which is normally known in the industry as a matching stain, and obviously the application of your final coat. First thing you need to do, obviously, is make sure that your machining and your tools are sharp when you do your planing and your machining. Then you need to find any of your imperfections and try and fill them in with suitable colour wood stock to complement your timber. Wood stopping mainly works in any recess, any imperfection that's 2 millimeters and smaller. If you go a bit big knots and deeper, then you need to think about moving over to a body filler type product. Now, if you are staining, you can use a normal body filler, or we do have a pine filler, polyester pine filler, which is a polyester body filler. With wood stoppings or water-based, you actually need to leave it at least an hour to dry properly to make sure all the moistures in that have come out before you start sealing it. Otherwise, you could have blushing and bubbling coming up from wherever you put it. Then we're going to have to select a suitable grit of paper. From my experience, for solid timbers, you need to go 100 or 120 grit paper. For veneers, 150 to 180 grit paper. You then sand out all your imperfections, any fibers that are stood up, and make sure that your product is nice and even before you start coating, because once you coat, it's difficult to go back there again. Before you start, then you're going to obviously have to blow up all your sanding dust before you get ready to do your sealer. With the MDF board, any exposed routings and all the exposed edges, you need to sand them off nice and smooth first before you start with anything. Make sure they're nice and smooth. Now, a base stain, I'll just use the broad terminology with it, it's actually penetrating stain. When you talk about penetrating stain, it must penetrate into the timber. You cannot put a penetrating stain on top of a sealed surface. Obviously, you're going to select the suitable color for the color you want to achieve at the end. A lot of times when I get called out to a problem out in the field, the guys are spraying on the penetrating stain. Now, what we do in our penetrating stain is put a bit of bitumen in it. It's a bitumen-like substance, which gives it a nice feel when you, what do you call it? What's the right word? Not texture, not luster, but it also helps you work it in. It gives you it makes it more workable.
Is it deeper?
Yeah, or makes it more workable, gives you a more open time and makes it more workable. Now what happens is when you start spraying it on and you're trying to get a dark color and you spray it on, all that sits on the surface. And when you put your top coat, your sealer coat in your top coat, at the end it could, I don't know if anybody's experienced it, it can cause a wrinkling. Now that's all that stuff that's sitting on the surface. So we normally, if you are going to spray it, wipe off the excess afterwards and push all this into the grain. But the best way to apply a penetrating stain is with a rag or a brush, but then you have to go afterwards again and wipe off the excess, which normally doesn't leave you with a dark color, very dark color. So if you are trying to achieve dark colors, what you're going to have to use is a penetrating and a matching stain system together. Yes.
What's the basis of the stain? Spirits?
Basically, it's solvents, or spirits, solvents and dye stuffs. And we dissolve the dyes into the stain. Your basic colors are red, black and yellow. And we do get a blue stain, which we normally mix the yellow and the blue together to get a green stain. Any other questions? And then obviously, with a stain and a piece of timber being having different densities, and MDF board having different densities all over the place, even worse. Where the grain is less dense, it's going to suck more in, go darker there, and like MDF, and like cherry woods, and I think the maples and the beeches, when you try and stain them on the raw wood, they actually blotch all over the place, and it can look terrible, especially when someone's paying a fortune for the item, and they notice all this blotchiness all over the place. So if you are going to stain any of those exotic timbers like cherry, beech and maple, it's better to seal it in first, and I'll touch on matching stains or intermediate stains later than you normally blow over them. So obviously it seals off the density. And obviously with MDF you do the same thing. If you're going with a very dark color, which is the fashion and the trend at the moment, you need to achieve quite a bit of your strength of color in the penetrating stage first, and then obviously put your sealer coat and denib, and then start with your matching over it. But obviously I'll touch on that when we get there. Now, we've got different types of sealer. Now, I'm mainly going to be talking about our industrial products. If you need to, you can also ask me questions about our decorative, our varnishes and all that. But my forte is on the industrial side. Acid catalyzed lacquers are the most economical, hard-wearing lacquers available in this country. They are banned overseas for the emissions that they give. It's called the free formaldehyde that it gives off. It normally burns your nose and your eyes a little bit. But they're not very dangerous. I mean, all fumes are not pleasant to have, but that's why in South Africa it's still one of the best economical performing lacquers that we have available. Our brand name for acid catalyzed lacquers is Woodline. I know it's available at Timber City, and the next one is the old sanding sealers, nitrocellulose lacquers. Now, acid catalyzed lacquers takes a harder, whereas nitrocellulose lacquers are single pack. So you don't have to worry about pot life and mixing the acid catalyzed lacquers outperform nitrocellulose lacquers for wear and tear and water resistance. And then the Rolls Royce at 3 times the price roughly is the polyurethane acrylic enamels. Very similar to what goes on your motor car. Also, that takes a hardener, but when you're using this product, you need to really have you actually need to do it in a spray booth to take away all the excess fumes, because the hardener base is isocyanate, and it's actually a carcinogenic chemical, which is cancer causing. So if you're going to finish off an article, obviously you've got to decide what you want from your lacquer system. So obviously, a system, if you start with the product in your system, you've got to end with the product. It's better to stick with systems and not mix and match products. So basically, most of the time, acid catalyzed lacquers is the preferred choice. nature of these products are to dry quickly, so it's actually unfriendly to the brush. However, there are people that use it. You can brush it, but it doesn't flow out and nicely and take out the brush lines. If you work quickly with it on small surfaces, you could much surely get away with brushing it, and if you don't put it in too thick, and if you use a matte instead of a high gloss. But all of these products are better sprayed. It gives you much better results when you spray it.
Sorry, what's your drying times on them, on average?
Touch dry on all three. The nitrocellulose could go, I'd say in summer about 15 minutes touch dry. Acid catalyzed lacquers 20 to 25 minutes touch dry, where it's basically dust free. And the polyurethane acrylics a bit longer, half an hour. Hard dry for sanding, acid catalyzed lacquers, you're looking at an hour plus so that you can sand it. Nitrocellulose is normally very fast, but the transfer efficiency of nitrocellulose, transfer efficiency meaning from the gun to your article that you're spraying, is you've got to thin it down quite a bit to get it through the spray gun. So you're actually putting less on. So that's why it gives you the feeling that it dries faster. That you could get away with maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes. The polyurethane acrylics take much longer to dry. You're looking at a good couple of hours between coats before you sand and apply the next coat.
The nitrocellulose, how much can you thin it for spraying? 10%?
No, it's actually more than the acid catalyzed lacquers. You normally thin about 10 to 15%. Our nitrocellulose, which is, we call it HVNC, high viscosity nitrocellulose. High viscosity means thick.
Yeah.
That's our sanding sealer. That you've actually got to thin 1-to-1 with a good blend of lacquer thinners. The cheaper blends you mostly have to put more in because it doesn't cut as fast. We do have a ready-for-use sanding sealer, which you might have to thin about 10% still. When we talk ready for use, is not, you normally have to still add a little bit in. That's why the transfer efficiency, acid catalyzed lacquers, you'll feel they're a lot thinner in the tin, and you don't have to add as much solvent to get it through the spray and through the job.
Number of coats before you start putting your final.
Well, it depends on what finish you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, can you put, for example, 4 or 5 coats on without any?
Well, yeah. What you can do is while you're spraying, obviously you've got to see how it's going, how much you put on as a person, your spraying technique, how much you're putting on. Normally, a box coat, which is that way and then that way, is sufficient. You could go for the second box coat, and that should suffice as a sealer coat. And then obviously the same thing as your top coat. If your timber is very porous, you might have to go for a second sealer layer and then your top coat. It all depends on what finish you're trying to achieve. Especially with the tops. If you're doing vanity tops and all that, it's best to try and get as many coats on as possible. Obviously not overloading, because you could have a cracking problem. You don't want to plaster the coating on, but you want to put a nice generous coating on to make sure you seal them all the way around. The old nitrocellulose, those are the lacquers that used to leave those ring marks on the coffee tables, which forced us to use coasters. Acid catalyzed lacquers and polyurethane acrylics are obviously water resistant. The polyurethane acrylic is more water resistant, which has been more suitable for bathroom areas, kitchen areas, tops. However, when we talk about lacquers in our industry, we talk about a curing time. Now, there's a difference between hard dry and fully cured. Hard dry can be within a couple of hours or overnight drying. Fully cured is a week. The product actually chemically reacts for about a week after you finish spraying and we think it's dry. And that's when it's at its optimum, that's at its full water resistance, scratch resistance. But the nitrocellulose lacquers just don't perform. If you want to use the product exterior, Our polyurethane acrylic is, the brand name for it is Wood Krill. That is designed to go outside. Most, even the varnishes that are the exterior varnishes today, like yacht varnish and all that, they do not have enough UV absorbers in them to actually block the sun's rays. So the sun's rays go right through the coating and actually bleach the timber underneath. So you actually need a product that's UV protected to protect your timber. So if you want something that's going to go, obviously then you've got to make the right choice of your system, especially if it's going to go outside. And our Wood Krill product has got UV stabilizers in it. Right now, moving on. Okay, we've stained the timber, or we haven't, or we've prepared it for sealing now. So we've either stained or just a normal raw sand, because we're going to go with a clear flat system. Obviously now we've selected that we're going to go with the correct sealer. So when you start off, obviously you stir the product very well. Decant the amount, especially if you're spraying with a catalyzed product, you've got to decant the right, correct amount and measure out your catalyst in the correct proportion. So obviously you would have checked with the supplier what the proportions are and then measure accordingly. And then also, when we talk about the thickness of paint and how you measure it, you know, in summer the paint is thinner than in winter, but when it's colder the paint thickens up. Now, if you are doing production and you spray quite often, this is one of the best tools to have for mixing the paint to the correct viscosity, which is the thickness. It's called a Ford 4 cup. And basically what it is a little vessel with a hole in the bottom. Once you've mixed your catalyst into your product and stirred it well, you then fill this vessel up with the paint in the paint pot. As you pull it out, you start your stopwatch. And as it empties out, you stop your stopwatch. Now when you're spraying with a normal conventional gun, around about 17 to 19 seconds should suffice in viscosity to get a nice even finish. When you've got your more sophisticated spray guns, which are airless, you can run at higher viscosities. But you know, to get the paint through this tip, you need to add acid catalyze that is normally about 10 to 15%, but obviously it changes according to temperature. These are quite expensive. I mean, these are over 100 rand for this piece of plastic, but it will save you a lot of wastage, because a lot of the time guys over thin and then they've got to put more coats on, and thinners is just the transport medium and the thinners takes off into the air, so you've got to put in extra effort to try and get a nice coating on it.
So where can we buy that cup?
You can order it through, you can ask Timber City to order it through us. You can get it from any one of our House of Paint stores or from us directly at Kingsford if it's close by for you. Or if you've got an automotive paint supply in your area, you know, they supply the panel meters and that, they normally don't they? Well, if you want to, what we can do is, I don't know if there's anybody here from Timber City, but I mean, all you need to do is get them to order a Ford 4 viscosity cup from us and we'll supply them. All right, I've touched basically on a decent box coat. 130 grams a square meter is our recommended spreading rate. It equates basically about 130 milliliters per square meter. If you overload and you spray too much sealer, you add too much top coat, you've got a chance that your product could crack. So try and keep it, you know, and you'll see it's normally a nice wet coat. And obviously, you allow the sealer to dry in the prescribed time. Now, when you're spraying any board, if you've got any exposed edges, and exposed routings, MDF is like a sponge. If you spray it wet, it's just going to keep sucking and sucking. And when you're trying to get the edge, you're going to be loading on the surface. And you're just going to stand there and spray and spray and spray. So what we recommend, we've got an edge sealer, which is acid catalyzed lacquer. And we recommend that you actually, if you're doing a whole lot of boards, you can stack them. The best way to do is to put the sealer on with a brush. Obviously, you pre-sanded your edge nicely and your routings, and you push this sealer in with a brush, and you leave it to dry for an hour. Now, for the best results, it's good then to take a 320 or 400 grit paper and just lightly pull it across the surface and break off any of the fibers that are stood up. You do not want to sand all the sealer off again because you're going to open up the superwood. And that's the mistake most guys make, is that they do sand it all off again and you expose it, and then what happens, your next coat just gets sucked in. But what it does is that it then seals off that sponge. And then afterwards you carry on with your normal sealer coat. You'll go on the edge and the surface to seal it off. Hardwood superwood edge sealer, we call it. I never brought all our data sheets because it's difficult to cater for everybody's needs. But what we can do, can do it through Paul or Dennis. Any of the products that you require data sheets on, you can either get my email address and email me direct, or let them do it, and I can email you certain data sheets that you require. Okay, so intermediate sanding we refer to as denibbing, and basically it's just breaking off those fibers that have stood up. As the coating dries, it pulls up all those fibers and the nibs stick up. I enjoy sanding with 320 or 400 grit paper because anything lower than that, you can see the scratch marks and it just removes your sealer. Now, what's the use of putting your sealer down if you're going to take it all off again? Obviously, that was my second point. Do not remove all your sealer and then blow off the dust that's gone into the grain, because if you haven't blown it off properly and you put your top coat on, all that dust is going to show like a milky white appearance in the grain, and you're going to have to sand it all off to try and get rid of it. And especially if you have gone with the dark stain, it shows everything up from the bottom. Okay, now the intermediate stain I referred to earlier is matching stain. Now that stain is designed to go on top of sealers. We do add a bit of a resin to it, a binder, to hold it together. But the trick with matching stain is not to spray it on wet like paint. You actually need to pull the gun a little bit away from the article and let the fumes land on the surface. If you over apply it, it can mottle and look terrible, or it can be a layer of, because once the solvent evaporates, you've basically got powder, which the stain is in a powder form when we start off. So you've got a layer of powder in between two coats of lacquer, which could cause peeling. And if you have used your penetrating stain on top of your sealer with that bitumen in it, that bitumen-based product, then it also will definitely cause peeling. And it doesn't peel now, it actually peels 3 months down the line when it's at the customer and they call you to come back and fix up the problem. And the nice thing about a matching stain is, obviously it doesn't, because it's going on top of the sealer, you could use it as a pennant as your first color too. There you would want to spray it on, because if you rag it, because of the resin, it dries quickly and it could leave streaks. But it doesn't soak, go into the different densities. And what it does is it just lightly colors your sealer and it gives you a nice translucent stain that you can see the grain coming. Obviously, if you whack on a good few coats, you're obviously going to obliterate the grain, but it gives you a nice uniform color, and it actually can make your furniture look quite classy if you use it in a system of penetrating stain all by itself. And if you're doing any spot repairs or touch-ups, a matching stain works beautifully. The trick with it is not to pull the trigger fully all the way back. You just pull the trigger slightly back, and we call it feathering. You can actually see it as it's coming out, and you can just keep building it up until you get the right color. If you're doing a spot repair on like a corner or something like that. Any questions on stains?
How, the thinner,
Yes.
how important is
In the lacquers.
it? You know, when you're putting bulk on stuff like that.
Well,
It always
if
has
you
thinners.
if you put too much thinners, you're actually wasting thinners. First of all, you thin your product out too much, which could also cause runners. You know, while you're spraying, it could be too thin to be able to hold together, and then just run off the edges. So, and if you don't put enough thinners in, what will happen is the paint is going to battle to come through the nozzle and actually come out unevenly, and it doesn't flow out and give, so what we call orange peel. It'll actually give you an orange peel effect where it gets very tight and it doesn't flow out and give you a nice smooth finish. So what happens is when you spray, the paint goes in the vessel. It gets pushed through the nozzle. This one works with gravity. Now, this over here is called your air cap. There's air that actually comes out over here and actually, we call it breaks it into fine particles, and we call it, it atomizes the paint particles. Now, first of all, if you've got too much or too little air, if you haven't set your gun right, or the paint's too thick, it doesn't break it up into nice fine, atomize it into nice fine particles. And what happens when you're applying it, it doesn't flow out and give you that nice even finish. And a tip for if you're spraying TV cabinets or anything with a backing board, put the backing board in last. Because when you're spraying inside this cabinet, you're going to get blowback all the time, no matter how low you drop your pressure, and it leaves that white residue on the side, which is overspray. So one thing we've learned, and when you're designing it, to put your backing board in last, and it gives you time and space to actually get in there and spray a nice wet coat. You don't have these problems. Because obviously in the warm summer months, the paint dries like lightning.
You're talking about industrial equipment. Is it high pressure spraying equipment, or can you use it on a low pressure system?
Basically, as I said to you earlier, your atomizing takes place at a certain pressure. Now, different makes of guns work at different pressures. Your high volume, low pressure guns, which is your HVLP guns, they normally work at a lower pressure to atomize. I think they're around about 2.5 bar, 2 to 2.5 bar. Whereas your normal conventional guns normally go up to about 4 bar. So obviously you're going to get a lot more overspray at 4 bar. If you use too little pressure, obviously it's not going to atomize correctly as it's coming out that nozzle. On a conventional gun, I like spraying between 2.5 and 3 bar to try and minimize the overspray. So obviously, yes. And then also, if you've got sophisticated guns like an HVLP, the gun consumes air. So you can't run it off an 8mm pipe. You actually run it off a 10mm pipe with 8mm fittings on it.
I've actually have sprayed acid catalyst with the boiler system, and the low pressure and then got after HVLP.
Now with airless guns, it doesn't atomize with air. It actually gets pumped hydraulically with a pump. And what happens is that the paint gets forced through a tiny orifice, and as it escapes from that orifice, it actually breaks up, it atomizes into fine particles. Totally different system to normal conventional spray. Normally, in a hive, you'll be using that in high production for factory, not for your home use.
The only thing I picked up is if you use a low pressure, normal low pressure pressing about your spray rate or your thickness of the coat.
The delivery rate of an airless is much higher, but if it's put in the hands of the wrong person, your wastage could also shoot through the roof.
No, airless is fine. For the low pressure spray guns, you use low pressure spray guns. I haven't seen them on the market for a while. But if you're high pressure, low pressure, then
Similar to your sealer coat, we've got acetylase top coats. They come in various gloss levels, from a matte to a satin, to a sheen, to a silk, to a gloss. When you're spraying with a high gloss, obviously your foundation, you need to put a nice coat to seal it down, so you get a nice foundation for your gloss to sit on, so you can get true reflection and the depth of your gloss. Nitrocellulose lacquers, obviously, we also move up in various gloss levels. And the polyurethane acrylic, we're actually quite limited there. It comes in satin or gloss. The wood film. Alright, so when we're getting ready to now, we've done everything, we've stained it, we selected the suitable product and the suitable gloss level. When you're doing your finishing coat now, obviously if you're choosing a matte, it's obvious to stir the product very well to get all the matting agent off the bottom of the tin and get it going and get it nice and thoroughly mixed in the tin. If you don't do that, as you're going down, it's going to go from gloss to matte to white powder, basically. You'll just be spraying matting agent at the end. When you're using your stirring, so when you're stirring, it's also, if you're using twin pack material, do not take the same stick from the fresh paint, stir your catalyzed material and go and stick that stick back in the fresh paint, because it's obviously going to start a reaction, and you know, after a period of time you will find it will gel up. And when you're applying your top coat, you want to apply it's slightly at 110 grams a square meter. It's slightly lower than your sealer coat. If you want to put on a bit more, then it's up to you. Obviously, as I said before, be careful with overloading. One thing I wanted to say quickly about sealer coat. If you're spraying open grain timbers like oak, mahogany, Marenti, sapele, when you put a heavy coat straight onto that board, what will happen is there's air in the grain. As you put the paint on the surface, the air is going to want to come up. And it doesn't have enough time to come up and pop and flow. So you'll have bubbles in the surface. So the best way to try and overcome this, obviously, is to try and spray two thin coats. What you can do is put a very quick coat just to wet the grain, wait 7 to 10 minutes till it's slightly tacky, and build on another coat. And we call this basically wet on wet coating. So you can actually put on maybe 3 coats like that and just build it up. It will limit, you still will get gassing from the grain, but it will limit it. And obviously, if you haven't sanded it correctly through, and you go and whack on a heavy coat or top coat, those bubbles are going to show on your top coat and you're going to have to start all over again. If you do want to close the grain, it's best to use what we call a grain filler, which is a water-based product similar to wood stopping, but it'll come in like a mousse form. And you rub it into the grain, wipe off the excess across the grain, leave it to dry for an hour plus, and then you sand it nice and smooth. Unfortunately, we call it natural, but it's got a slight colour to it. So it depends on the tin. You might have to do a staining process over it just to try and mask the grain filler. But then it also will close that grain and make it easier to give you a nice closed grain finish. You will never fill it with just spraying lacquer, unless you put on a coat, sand it all off, put on a coat, and it's normally like a piano finish. It's about 8 to 10 steps that you've got to do to get that nice closed finish. Now, obviously, when you've finished off the article, you want to let it dry in a nice dust-free environment. If you are going to package the product to deliver to your customer, it's best to leave it overnight to dry so that it gets nice and hard dry. And if you do wrap it too soon with plastic, it's going to trap the solvents in it, and obviously if it's bubble wrap or blankets, it will then just imprint itself on the surface of your lacquer. Just let me touch on, when you're spraying your sealer and you're spraying the top coat, if you are spraying and you're using the sun or an oven or a heated area to dry your product, you need to allow it, what we call, give it 10 minutes to flash off and allow the solvents to escape, and then you can go and put it into that heated environment, the sun or an oven type of facility. If you put it in too soon, the solvents will start boiling in the coating and wanting to escape, and it will leave pinholes all over the place. And obviously, if you are spraying an open ground and you go and whack it out into the sun, it will then aggravate those bubbles to want to come up from the bottom too and cause all sorts of nonsense. All right, equipment. A compressor, obviously you know there's the draining valve underneath. You need to drain it regularly because it builds up moisture in there, and moisture and paint just don't get along well. And obviously with that moisture comes a bit of oil, and that's a contaminant. Paint and oil and wax and silicones just don't get along. So you need to drain it regularly. If you are running a production line or spraying for a living, it's good to have regulated water traps on your air lines. And it's not good to put it directly on your compressor, because what happens is the vapor comes through and doesn't have time to cool down and condense in the trap. It goes straight through that trap and it will condense in your air pipes, in your air line. So it's normally better to keep your water trap as far away from your compressor as possible. So run it, bit of plumbing through to a water trap and then plug your spraying line into the water trap. You need to select the correct gun for the job. Now, this is actually a bit more sophisticated than a conventional gun. This gun over here is what we call an RP, reduced pressure. It's in between conventional and HVLP. It's actually a lovely gun. Costs an arm and a leg, but it's not suitable for home use. Unless you've got a compressor that can deliver more than 300 litres of air a minute, this gun will never be satisfied. And even though it runs on lower pressures, it consumes air. This is your gravity feed gun. You do then get a suction feed gun, which then pressurizes to push the paint through. This one runs through the gravity. This one is a good all-rounder. The suction feed limits you when you're trying to get into places when you're spraying. This one, you can change your angle, and obviously you can't spray it like that, but you've got a couple of more working angles. If you want to be able to get in at any angle, then you've got to consider a pressure pot, which is obviously which is a vessel which sits in the ground. Put your paint in there, you pressurize it, and it runs paint to the gun from underneath, and you've actually got you've got about a half a kilogram of paint at all times that makes you tired. There, you've got 10 litres or 20 litres of endless supply of paint, and you can work at any angle because it's pressurized from the vessel. Same with an Ellis gun, it gets pressurized from the source. We touched on it earlier. You need to consult the manufacturer of your gun and select the correct pressures. Too high a pressure, you're going to have paint everywhere but on the job, and you're going to have imperfect finishes. Too level pressure, you're not going to atomize the paint properly, and you're also not going to get a decent finish. And last but not least, safety. When you're working with any product, whether it's stain or paint, try and work in a very well ventilated area. You could get overcome by these fumes. It could make you sick. It could make you lightheaded, which we've seen. When you're using any product that's got solvents or paints or anything, wear a spray mask with cartridges on it. Those dust masks, those white dust masks, which are called nuisance masks, are actually illegal. A lot of the vapors get caught in them, and then you get poisoned by those vapors. The cartridge extracts some of the nonsense out of the paint. You do need to then keep that mask in a sealed container, and then change those cartridges on a regular basis. depending on how much you're using the mask. And never smoke or eat while working with paints or solvents. And obviously keep it away from open flames. And also when you're storing it in your garage, be careful of your other products like chlorine and that. When you're storing things and fertilizer, you just make sure that you keep it all away from each other so you don't have some reaction in the air. And just try and save on your, and not throw paints away. Close all your containers properly and store it. It's best to actually store it upside down. Make it last a bit longer.
Just going to get back to the gun.
Yes.
If you get a gun in your hand for the first time, how
Yes.
do you go about setting it up? Because I clean mine and I might just have upset the settings.
The best way is to actually get the feel for it. So obviously, what you could do is get yourself a panel, mix yourself a little bit of paint, get it to the right viscosity, and then play around with it. And on the gun, this is your fluid setting normally over here because it's in line with your needle. If you squeeze it in, obviously it restricts the needle, and if you pull it out, you can also set it. You can do it manually by hand, but how far you squeeze the trigger in. If you let it in slightly, it will let less paint. Put it in all the way, it will let full volume of paint through. On this gun, this is the fan setting over here. I don't know if all guns have got them, so, and then this is your air regulator over here. Other guns is normally underneath. This is what we call a micrometer. This is, you can actually send full pressure to this, and you can set your correct pressure over here. And you know that you're not going to have dips in pressure from your regulator to here. You're setting 6 bar. I think it's going to set the maximum of 6 bar. And if you're trying to do splatter finishes, this is wonderful because then what you can do is choke the gun over here and you pull the trigger and normally you'll let that, the paint and not let it atomize properly and splatter it out. Any more questions?
Do you have a website, and if you do, what information is on it?
I know we've got a website. It'll be basic information on how to contact us and our different brand names of products. It'll be limited information. And normally it will go through a server and it will have some, you'll put your questions across and then obviously someone will overlook it and revert back to you. But if you need to ask any questions or not, you can always contact me directly.